The gulls began before dawn, shrieking across the slate-coloured sky and rattling the window panes of Harbour Hill Lighthouse bed and breakfast. Guests stirred, half dreaming that the birds were knocking, demanding entrance like rude clockmakers come to announce the hour. At 6:10, the ancient foghorn boomed once, long, mournful, and that, more than any alarm, drew everyone from warm quilts to cold floorboards. Darius Merrick, who had paid extra for the Lantern Room suite, was the first into the corridor. An architect from Boston, he fancied himself brave, even romantic, but the sight that met him when he opened the stairwell door turned his stomach. Captain Mary Shaw, proprietor of Harbour Hill, stood rigid on the landing, slicker half-fastened, binoculars clutched to her chest. She was staring through a salt-blurred pane toward the rocks below. Darius followed her gaze. At first he saw only whitecaps and wrack, but then, like a ghastly buoy, something pale rolled in the foam. Around it fluttered lengths of green kelp, knotted with unsettling precision into a jaunty bow. A few heartbeats later, the small community of guests assembled in the parlour. Darius, honeymooners Lonnie and Carla Vega, still in matching Harbour Hill bathrobes. Retired schoolteacher Eleanor Finch, silver hair braided as tidily as ever. And Professor Owen Caldwell, a marine biologist from the University of Rhode Island, whose spectacles fogged with each anxious breath. In the doorway loitered Jade Villarreal, travel blogger and freelance stirrer-up of trouble, phone poised to capture every syllable. The absence that hung over them all was the one man who should have been bustling in the kitchen. Chef Patrice Pat Lefebvre, master of cornmeal crepes and reckless poker hands. Captain Shaw spoke in a voice gravelled by salt and sleeplessness. "I'm afraid that was Pat. The tide brought him in just now." She did not add, "We're 14 miles offshore, with a storm brewing and the radio tower struck by lightning last night." She didn't need to. Lonnie squeezed Carla's hand. Maybe he slipped off the jetty after his smoke." Professor Caldwell shook his head. No one slips and ties seaweed in a decorative bow around themselves afterward. He removed his glasses, cleaning them not for clarity, but for composure. That was deliberate staging. Whoever did it wanted us to see a message. Jade lifted her phone higher. "Any idea what the message says, Captain?" Mary's grey eyes narrowed. Normally she tolerated Jade's constant posting, because free publicity never hurt, yet today the screen felt intrusive, scavenger-like. "Put that away until we sort things out." A gust rattled the shutters, and for an instant the lighthouse seemed to inhale sharply, as though preparing for a long downward scream. Mary straightened and announced the practicalities. "First priority is alerting the mainland. Harbour County Sheriff will need a formal report and a boat, but the landline's dead, and the satellite unit isn't holding charge since the strike. I'll take the Storm Petrel to Cedar Hollow and bring back help." "If it's sabotage," Eleanor Finch asked, voice soft but firm, "shouldn't the rest of us lock ourselves inside until authorities arrive?" Mary nodded. "You'll bar the doors, stay together in the common rooms, and touch nothing that doesn't belong to you. Whoever harmed Pat won't get another chance here." She didn't add unless they're already sitting on that sofa. Outside, rain began as a fine hiss gathering against the clapboards. Mary donned her full captain's gear, oilskin coat scarred from decades in the Coast Guard, and headed down the cliff path toward the boathouse. Darius, determined to prove gallantry, insisted on accompanying her to check the engine. She allowed it. A second pair of eyes wouldn't hurt. They entered the boathouse to a smell of diesel and damp nets. Mary hit the generator switch. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. She crouched beside the console and traced wires until her fingers encountered a clean slice. Sabotage, no question. She heard Darius exhale sharply. "You carry wire cutters in Boston, Mr. Merrick?" she asked without looking up. His answer came too quick. "No, Captain, you can't seriously—" "I'm serious about everything when a man is dead." Mary found a spare fuse and a leftover length of copper. 10 minutes' work, but the job would hum only a few hours. Someone had meant for the Storm petrel to stay moored. Perhaps that someone sat safely high in the lighthouse now, expecting the captain to remain grounded. The wind slashed sideways through the half-open doors. Whitecaps pummeled the pilings. Even repaired, the petrel would face a miserable passage. Darius, sensing her hesitation, whispered, "Is there an alternative?" "There's always an alternative," Mary replied, staring at the maze of rocks that ringed the island like a bear trap. "But they all get worse from here." Back at the lighthouse, she summoned the guests to the dining room, ironically set with starched linens and empty plates awaiting a breakfast that would never come. Jade crept about, snapping photos, until Mary confiscated the phone and slid it into a drawer. Shock brightened Jade's cheeks more than the confiscation. She seemed suddenly aware that what was happening was not content but tragedy. Mary unfolded a brittle legend before them. "That bow of seaweed has meaning here. A century ago, Harbour Hill lightkeepers spoke of the Green Bride, spirits of sailors' wives who waited so long their grief tethered to rocks and grew kelp for veils. When a drowning looked suspicious, folks would claim a green bride tied seaweed in a lover's knot. Superstitious hogwash. But Pat once told that story, and told it loud, during our lobster bake last month." She tapped her knuckles against the tabletop. "Someone used the tale to cloak a murder in folklore." Lonnie, voice wavering, asked what everyone wondered. "You think the killer's one of us?" Mary's reply was hard as granite. "I know it is. Nobody else came here yesterday. Storm or not, they must wait for sheriff's deputies." In the meantime, Mary intended to observe. She distributed tasks: Eleanor to brew coffee, Comfort in crisis, Carla to tally guest movements last night, Darius to draft a list of possible motives gleaned from conversation over the past 48 hours. Caldwell to examine the seaweed sample Mary had retrieved, hoping scientific minutiae might pinpoint where it was gathered. Jade, sulking without her phone, was relegated to polishing silverware beneath Eleanor's watchful eye. Daylight lumbered across the Atlantic, a dull pewter stripe. By noon, the wind escalated to a hoarse roar. Lantern glass quivered. From the gallery deck, Mary spied foam exploding against the rocks like mortars. She pictured the petrel threading that gauntlet with a jury-rigged generator. Peril, yes, but also possibility. The killer expected her to try and fail, to be trapped here until outside law arrived and maybe until evidence washed away. She gnawed this thought while cross-checking Carla's timeline. 22:15, Lonnie and Carla strolled the eastern parapet, glimpsed Pat smoking near the winch house. 22:40, Eleanor retired, heard no unusual footfalls. 23:05, Darius remained in the library studying lighthouse blueprints. Claims Pat peeked in to borrow the key to the wine cellar. 23:30, Caldwell worked on a laptop in the reading nook, verifying tide charts, noticed Pat pass carrying a basket. Contents unknown. 23:50. Jade live-streamed from the top balcony, didn't mention Pat at all. The time window for murder was broad. Pat's body could have floated for hours before washing back. But that bow, staged right here, likely before midnight slack tide. Someone strong enough to haul a body down the cliff track, intimately familiar with currents. Mary found Caldwell hunched over the sample beneath fluorescent glare in Pat's old prep kitchen. "Eelgrass," he muttered. "Common, but this particular blade shows abrasion consistent with netting. Gill nets, probably from the South Cove. I walked there yesterday morning collecting gastropods. No nets, then." "Meaning the killer set lines overnight?" Mary asked. "Or borrowed from a fisherman," Caldwell replied. "Either way, someone moved about after curfew." Mary thanked him, though a chill rippled her spine. Caldwell's intellect cut like a scalpel. He could as easily dissect alibis as algae. She took a thermos of strong coffee to the lantern room to think. Pat had been more than an employee. He'd been her partner in salvaging Harbour Hill from bankruptcy after she left the service. He ran the kitchen with flamboyant charm, but secrets simmered beneath. 3 weeks ago, she'd discovered her small cash safe light by nearly $2,000. Pat swore he'd borrowed it to cover a debt and would repay after tourist season. Had the debt followed him here? Mary descended the spiral just as the lights flickered. Then darkness swallowed the stairwell. She froze, one hand on the cold iron rail. From below came a metallic snap, a frayed cable. She smelled ozone and brine, then heard the groan of shifting weight against the lighthouse skin. In the dark, her foot found a loose rung. She stumbled backward, catching herself inches from a 4-story drop through the hollow core. Someone had removed the safety grate. Her flashlight beam revealed fresh tool marks on the bolts. Another trap. Her breath steamed. At ground level, she burst into the parlour, fury whipping behind her words. "Who tampered with the stair grate?" No one answered. Faces mirrored shock or practiced innocence. Rain hammered the shutters now, like fists demanding entry. Darius stood quickly. "Captain, we were all together. Playing cards. You know that." Indeed, she had left them clustered around Pat's card table. Yet the killer had still found time. Mary's pulse pounded so loud it muffled the storm. She took a long glance at the shutters bowing in the wind, and a decision crystallized. Remaining here invited more sabotage. The sheriff might not reach them for half a day. She would sail, and she would take every guest aboard. If the killer wanted her dead on the rocks, they'd have to ride the same peril. By 15 high, the rain became needles of ice. Mary distributed sea boots and life jackets from the emergency locker. Jade fumed that Mary still held her phone. Mary replied, "Hands free for the railings, or you're staying." That silenced argument. They trooped toward the boathouse, heads ducked, slickers flapping. Waves smashed over the dock, anvil crashes of spray. Mary had lashed extra fuel cans and lashed again for luck. Inside the cabin, she performed a quick systems check while the guests wedged themselves onto benches meant for lobster traps rather than humans. The engine coughed, then turned over. Good girl, Mary thought. She cast lines and throttled ahead, nose bucking like a bronco. The cliff loomed to starboard, white water foaming at its teeth. She set a course through Devil's Channel, a narrow gap between basalt fangs where cross-currents bullied even-seasoned sailors. Behind her, the lighthouse lantern flashed uselessly in the murk, 1 second on, 4 seconds off, rhythm she knew by heartbeat. Carla clung to Lonnie. Darius shut his eyes outright. Eleanor, to Mary's admiration, hummed, "Abide with me." Jade alternated between whimpers and demands for an explanation. Professor Caldwell remained unnaturally calm, gaze fixed on the depth finder. At the channel's mouth, Mary cut throttle to study the rip lines. Somewhere beneath, the bottom shoaled from 60 feet to 13 in one swoop. Stray a yard and the prop would convert to shrapnel. When she eased forward, a new sound rose, hiss of water inside the bilge. A leak. She engaged the pump. Nothing. Sabotaged, of course. From the shadows, Caldwell stepped closer. "Captain, the seacock lever under port bench has been removed. I saw it early but didn't want to raise panic." Mary held his eyes. "You repaired it?" "Tied it off with net twine." He handed her the missing brass lever. "But it won't last in this chop." "Then we hurry." She jammed throttle. The Storm petrel lunged. A jagged swell lifted the bow, then slammed it sideways. Jade screamed. Salt spray blinded Mary a beat too long. When vision cleared, she saw the reason for the swell, an uncharted breaker where no breaker should be. A reef? Memory scrolled maps in her mind. No reef here. She yanked the wheel, but too late. A scraping reverberated like thunder drawn through tin. Alarm buzzers shrieked. The hull had kissed granite. Amid the chaos, Caldwell shouted, "We're holed forward." Mary gunned reverse to back off, but the engine shuddered. Salt water poured around their ankles now. In the bilge locker, she found the emergency patch kit. She thrust it at Darius. "You said you were handy with plans. Time to get handy with resin." He crawled forward with grim determination. While he worked, Mary scanned radar. An anomalous return glowed dead ahead, metallic, moving. She increased gain. A small craft sat half submerged, tethered to the phantom reef by anchor lines strung with floats. Nets. Understanding detonated. Someone had laid an artificial obstacle, lured her into it by sabotaging the grate so she'd choose this desperate voyage. Whoever controlled those nets could collapse them and let the reef vanish. She spun to study her passengers. Lonnie and Carla cowered together. Eleanor prayed. Jade filmed now, God bless her nerve. Only Caldwell stood bone dry on the elevated step, scientific calm radiating like an ice pack. Too calm. Mary drew the flare gun from the overhead rack. "Professor, step forward." Brows lifted. "Is that necessary? I think you knew exactly where this floating reef lay. You guided me by silence." She gestured at the brass lever in his hand. "You removed the seacock, prepared a patchy fix to buy just enough time. Pat recognize you from the docks on the mainland, maybe? Did he threaten to expose your smuggling?" Caldwell's pause lasted a heartbeat too long. Then his shoulders sagged. "He found my cages yesterday," he said, voice maintaining its lecturing cadence. "Experimental aquaculture, illegal only because regulators cling to archaic restrictions. He wanted hush money. I paid. Then he wanted more. The market for live exotic urchins is astronomical, Captain. I couldn't allow a greedy chef to jeopardize 15 years of research." Darius emerged, resin smeared, having slowed the breach but now privy to confession. Jade filmed with renewed zeal. Mary kept the flare trained. "So you killed him and staged the legend." Caldwell's expression turned wistful. "I merely ensured leverage. Sea would have kept him, but luck drifted him back. You forced my hand, deserting the lighthouse." He eyed the wheel. "If I take control now, perhaps we all survive. Otherwise your flare pops one hole, mine pops another." He produced a pistol from his coat, small, stainless, glinting like a fish at dawn. For a breath, the cabin contained 2 ticking engines, the diesel coughing under strain and the pounding of hearts. Rain lashed windows white. Mary's voice lowered. "You think I'd steer into Devil's Channel without redundancy?" She flipped a hidden toggle. Beneath Caldwell's feet, a steel shutter slid, revealing the Coast Guard issue armory compartment, now empty save brackets. The flare gun was decoy. Across the cabin, Lonnie lifted a 12-gauge retrieved earlier, when Mary whispered the plan while handing out life jackets. The barrel centered on Caldwell's chest. Professor's pistol wavered, then clattered on wet deck boards. In that instant, Jade's camera witnessed the face of a man who realized intellect could not outmaneuver the raw arithmetic of a shotgun. "Eleanor," Mary commanded, "zip-tie our guest." The old teacher obliged with schoolmarm efficiency. With Caldwell subdued, Mary rushed topside. Darius's patch slowed the leak to a trickle. She engaged low throttle, steering by memory around nets whose floats now bobbed innocently. Rain eased to drizzle, as if the storm, having delivered its villain, permitted retreat. 20 minutes later, the Petrel cleared the channel into deeper water, where swells smoothed into long grey hills. Behind them, Harbour Hill Lighthouse blinked like a tired but triumphant eye. Near sunset, Cedar Hollow's pier appeared, orange lamplight a thin promise across pewter distance. Sheriff boats met them halfway after Mary hailed on the backup VHF Caldwell hadn't thought to disable. Deputies boarded, handcuffed the professor, and radioed for wildlife agents to seize his illicit cages concealed beneath net drapery. As officers ferried Caldwell away, he turned to Mary, an echo of scholarly pride still clinging. "You endangered your guests to trap me, Captain. History may judge that harshly." She answered through wind-burned lips. "History kept my lighthouse lit through wars and tempests. It'll handle the truth." Darius, Carla, Lonnie, Eleanor, and even Jade, who had already drafted a headline in her mind, disembarked in stunned silence, then one by one embraced Mary. The pulse of the dock under her boots felt solid, honest, not treacherous like that fabricated reef. Yet guilt washed her that she had indeed steered them all into peril. Necessary, she believed, but peril nonetheless. Later, as searchlights swept Harbour Hill's cliffs and investigators zipped Pat Lefebvre into a respectful shroud, Mary stood at the pier rail. Rain had ended. A slice of moon slipped through clouds, silvering the sea. The lighthouse beam, 20 miles distant, caught on that silver and broke into splinters like shattered glass. She lifted her battered captain's cap in salute to Pat, to guests who trusted a stranger at the helm, to the Green Bride legend twisted then righted. Tomorrow she would return, mend the stair grate, scrub blood-knot seaweed from shoreline rocks. The harbour would still sing its haunted songs, but murder had met its lantern, and the lantern had not blinked.